All right, guys, welcome back, Stupid Fast Nation. Hope y'all are having a great week and weekend. I'm bringing y'all back for a top 5 cheap, free modifications list for the Honda trx450r. Just like we did with the Yamaha YFZ450, I'd like to talk about what I think would be the best, cheapest, free, productive ways to get the most bang for your buck out of the trx450r platform. So, with that being said, I love these Hondas. They are a carbureted single cam, unicam. That was Honda's thing. They did the unicam design. I think it's a great platform. This one turned out to be an absolute animal. Kind of fell in love with it a little bit, I'm not going to lie. Anything that has a lot of horsepower, your boy really loves. So, let's jump right into it. I put this little list together here. I wanted to be really thorough for you guys. So we're going to dive into some cool stuff here. And I've got a bonus one if you stick around to the end. So let's get it going. All right, guys. So without a shadow of a doubt, if I was going to start upgrading my ATV or dirt bike or anything of this nature, I obviously would start with the air and fuel flow of the motor. Stock units come with an airbox lid and a kind of restrictive air filter. Some other types of four-wheelers come with a restrictive intake. This one is not well known for that. They free flow pretty good. So my first upgrade for you guys would be remove the airbox lid, put a high flow filter on. That is the easiest, cheapest way. You could even like taking the lid off would give you the most flow. But if you're kind of like, well, you do a lot of muddy riding and such, then you might just want to poke some holes in it or drill some holes in it, give you just that little bit more flow. Some companies like Outerwears and such do sell a screen or even a lid with a screen built into it. I don't know if they sell that for the Honda TRX, but I have seen that on some models where you get a replacement airbox lid and it has a screen built in, which will stop water and debris from getting in there to your filter to get sucked in and kill the motor, and still gives you phenomenal amount of airflow. So with that being said, airbox lid, high flow filter, definitely the first two things I would do. One other thing, you know, some guys get worried about the water and debris and stuff getting pulled in through the open air filter if you take the lid off. Outerwears make some really nice covers. They're very water resistant, debris resistant. I use them on like Banshee when I run open pod filters. They're great. I've never had a problem sucking in sand in the dunes or anything like that. I know lots of people who use them with great success. So I just wanted to make sure you guys know if you run no airbox lid, use an Outerwears cover, definitely will make things a lot more preventable. It will save you from catastrophic failure. Now, I'm gonna say this probably about 5 times throughout the video, but anytime, you know, your engine is like an air pump. So the fastest way that you can get air and fuel into your air pump and push it out the exhaust is going to create the most horsepower. So we need to create the most amount of air and fuel that we can get inside of the cylinder to be able to compress, to create the biggest explosion possible. That's how you create the most amount of horsepower, and doing that efficiently and effectively. So with that being said, anytime you upgrade the amount of air pulled into the engine, you have to also check your fueling, make sure everything is good for the fueling. Normally, I compile multiple modifications together. I don't normally just do one like the airbox lid and the filter, but you do have to upjet for things like this. You pull more air in, gotta add some more fuel. With that being said, let's move on to the next modification. So now we got the first modification out of the way, the airbox lid, the high flow air filter. We move forward to the carburetor. That controls not only some of the air that gets pulled into the engine, but also the fuel, and is very important. There's a handful of options of carburetors you can do for these Honda TRXs. One of the big ones is an 07 CRF450R carburetor. They are a 41 millimeter carburetor, which is a few millimeters step up from stock. So we'll open the opening up a little bit, just to allow a little bit more air to be pulled in. It's not an astronomical amount, but it will complement any other modifications you do to this engine. That is probably the most economical way to get a little bit more power out of these. If you start looking for aftermarket carburetors, or, you know, like, I remember back in the day they used to do like Edelbrock carburetors and stuff like that. I don't think they make those anymore, but they used to be like, you know, $600, $700, $800. So I haven't looked recently to see what the aftermarket options are for these, because they don't make the Honda TRX450R anymore, which is sad in my opinion. But being that Yamaha is the only, you know, production maker for race quads, sport quads. You know, the CRF450R, that's a good upgrade. It's the dirt bike. The dirt bikes typically have a lot more power than the quads. I'm not sure why the factories do it like that. Yamaha was famous for that. The dirt bike, they had the exhaust cam gear you could turn back and stuff like that. So I also wrote a couple tips down on my list here. One of them was you can put a YZ450 carb on this, which is an upgrade. I believe it was a 39 millimeter compared to the stock 38 millimeter carburetor. The only thing is you have to then wire in the TPS. I would recommend just leaving the TPS unplugged. It's a little harder to start sometimes because it doesn't retard the timing. That's literally what the TPS is designed to do. For the first few thousand RPM, it will pull the ignition timing back a few degrees, make it a little easier to start, easier to idle, but takes away a power within that few thousand RPM range. If you just leave it unplugged, you go to the higher ignition map within the CDI, the ECU essentially, and then it will stay in that map the entire time. That's literally all the TPS does. It just sends resistance feedback and changes which ignition map you are on. Also, the hot start is a problem if you run the YZ450 carb. There's another thing for carburetors in general, even on the stock carburetor, you can upgrade the accelerator pump. Boyson makes a hot shot kit. When you stab the throttle really fast, there's a spray of fuel that goes into the cylinder to give it a little bit of extra fuel so that thing can start increasing RPM, because these big bore 450s, man, they just suck in a ton of air and they can choke themselves out really easily. So a nice little upgrade to Boyson hot shot kit for the accelerator pump. Also, I heard rumors that you can cut the spring for the accelerator pump. I don't recommend doing that. I think that would take away from the amount of movement. It might make it a little easier to actuate, but I don't think that's going to give you anything extra. The Boyson hot shot would definitely do that though. So moving on to number 3. Now, I'm not going to be removing pieces from this ATV. I just got done putting this one together. I just got done cleaning it up yesterday because I was getting yelled at in my comments on the last video about how my stuff's always dirty. So I decided to give this thing a good pressure washing. She looks a lot better, a hell of a lot better. And so with that being said, I don't feel like taking this thing apart. But underneath of here, you have the CDI, and that is one of the big upgrades for the ignition curve on these things. So, you know, they sell aftermarket CDIs, so that's the first thing, and that's for any year that they made these. I am sure I can find an aftermarket CDI for this, like a Dynajet or something similar and comparable. But on 06 and up TRX450Rs, there's a really neat modification that's free, and there's a green wire coming off the ECU, and I did a bunch of reading on the forums, and the guys actually cut this wire, and it will increase your RPM limit. I believe they said 1,000 RPMs. Now, I haven't personally tested this out, but usually when I get info like that off the forums, if there's a ton of guys backing this up, it's pretty useful information. And so that's where I've learned my information over the years, is other guys kind of testing, and I research and I find these things out. So green wire 06 and up, if you snip that, obviously if it doesn't work, you can put the green wire back together, but if you snip it, you know, leave yourself enough room on there to make sure you can reattach it. But that should gain you more upper RPM, so this thing would hang tight for another 1,000 RPM rather than cutting off early. And so that, I don't know if Honda changed the RPM limit from 05 to 06. This one's an 05, so I can't do that modification on this one, but this thing already revs out pretty good. So, but yeah, that's a cool little trick. Thought I'd share that one with you guys. All right, guys, so we talked about air being pulled into the engine through the air filter, increasing the flow there. We talked about the carburetor and increasing the flow there, plus upjetting for your modifications. Again, I want to emphasize the engine's like the air pump. The more air you pull in, the more fuel you have to add to that. With that being said, we talked about the ECU and dialing in the ignition curve. The TPS, you can take that off, give you the entire advanced ignition map so that earlier in the RPM you don't have it. Depending on the type of riding you are doing, you know, you can or cannot do that modification. It's up to you at your discretion. And then we talked about ECU or CDI upgrades, which basically control the RPM cutoff, the limit, and then the timing map. And then you can do an aftermarket option to change that. So now that we got those things out of the way, let's move on to the next one, camshafts. Camshafts are a really quick and easy way, best bang for the buck in my opinion. Once you get all of your airflow opened up, a camshaft will only make it 10 times more better. And so there's a cool couple little upgrades you can do here. Number one is you could get an aftermarket camshaft. like a webcam or a hot cam or something similar. There's a bunch of companies out there that make camshafts for these. They give you more lift, more duration, holds the valves open a little bit longer. So when that piston's going down, it sucks in the max amount of air that it can. But those can get a little pricey sometimes. So your boy did some research, and there is some upgrades you can do that are a little bit more cost effective. One of those is the 2002 trx450r camshaft. You can swap one of those in here, and it is a lot more lift than the stock camshaft. They might not be as cheap as some of the other camshafts for this because people know about this modification. So, you know, if you're on eBay searching around, I don't know if you'll be able to find a great deal on these, but it's definitely worth a look. And it's definitely like one of them sneakier options. It's not like, you know, when you pop the motor open, you go, oh, it's got a webcam in it. No, it's a 02 CRF450, so it looks just like a stock Honda camshaft. With that being said, also the 04 is a good upgrade, and it has similar specifications to the HRC aftermarket cam, which costs a good bit more. So that would save you some money if you get a 2004 CRF 450 cam as well. All right, guys, so we talked about air and fuel being pulled in, making sure we upjet those things, upgraded carburetors. I didn't really touch base on like the needle or like what jetting should be at, because depending on the amount of modifications you have, all that stuff's gonna vary. So, you know, just keep in mind, you have to do your plug reads. I talk about this in a lot of videos, and you have to jet these things. Overfueling, a little bit more forgiving on 4 strokes versus 2 strokes. And then we moved into the camshaft. We talked about the lift. Couple little sneaky upgrades there, the CDI. Moving on, the last bang for the buck that you can get on almost any engine, 2-stroke, 4-stroke, doesn't matter, is the exhaust. So we talked about all that flow coming into the cylinder, and then, you know, ignition timing and all that stuff. And then now we got to talk about the flow coming out of the exhaust. Exhaust, actually, a lot of guys will just go right to exhaust for the first modification. I like to do it as a last because you don't need the exhaust flow until you start pulling in all of that extra airflow and fuel flow. A lot of stock exhaust systems, you can just take the baffle out, and that will increase the flow enough to keep up with any of the other modifications, except when you get into like the camshaft. When you start getting into the cam a little bit, you have to then go ahead and upgrade the exhaust, because it's really holding them valves open and sucking in a lot of air into the cylinder. So with that being said, exhaust not only makes it sound cool, but adds a ton of horsepower, especially on 2 strokes. But 4 strokes, you add an exhaust, and it really opens up that flow. I wouldn't get too crazy with, you know, this exhaust has the best, you know, flow, like Dave says, better than HMF is better than FMF. I'm not worried about that. A majority of them have very good flow. It's not until you start getting into like big bore stuff and whatnot where you gotta like really get a bigger exhaust header and stuff like that to be able to increase all that output flow. At least in my opinion. I don't have any dyno graphs to back that up. I just go off the ass dyno. So exhaust, you know, you have to do jetting with these things when you do the exhaust. There's just no way around it. So you do all those mods, complement it with the exhaust, get the cool sound, jet the crap out of this thing, and you'll have yourself a killer ripper. Guys, there is a ton of aftermarket options for almost any machine out there. All you have to do is go on Google, find what you like. This one happens to have a full DESA exhaust. So it's a header pipe, a mid pipe, and also the silencer on top of that. It's not really silent at all. This thing thumps pretty hard, but yeah, so now that we covered that, let's move on to the bonus. All right, guys, so let's talk about the bonus option. You know, we talked about all the air and fuel going into the motor, coming out of the motor, increasing it with the camshaft, and then dialing in your ignition timing to really bang all that together and get everything working in optimum condition. Once you get all of that done, and you're like, man, this thing just doesn't have enough power, the very last thing I would go for would be big bore stroker and porting, right? And so I would probably do it in a different order though. I would start with a big bore kit, and then I would be like, that's not enough power. And then I would go for porting. And then usually when I start getting into the camshaft a little bit is when I start adding porting to it. And then, because I do my own porting, so typically I can just port that without getting crazy into the bottom end and doing a stroker kit and stuff like that. And then the last thing I would go for would be the stroker, because then you have to take the whole motor out, split the cases, change the crank out. Sometimes the cases require machining depending on how deep the stroke of the crank is. And so, you know, that stuff can get really extensive with labor and time, very, very time consuming work. So that would be the order that I would do it. You know, I'd get into the porting with the camshaft, then do a big bore kit, because once you increase all of your airflow in and out of the motor, increasing the bore size only complements that also. And then adding the stroke just adds more depth for the piston to go down and up, which then will add more volume of air in the cylinder. And then, like I said with everything else, make sure you're taking the time to get your carburetor dialed in properly, okay? I cannot emphasize that enough. It's okay to be a little on the richer side. You're really not gonna lose a ton of horsepower. And also, fuel cools the motor down inside the cylinder, and that helps the running of the quad overall. So that goes with any motor, not just 4-strokes. It's okay to overfuel a little bit. In my opinion, I like to keep them a little bit safer by doing that, especially when you're increasing ignition timing and things like that. If you run the slightest bit lean, you can burn the edge of the piston off, spit it out, and then you're having a really bad day. So one other thing I forgot to add was when you do big bore and stroker kits, sometimes they can produce a lot more heat in the motor, and you have to look at water pump upgrades and stuff like that. So definitely keep that in mind, do your research. I did not look to see if there was water pump upgrades for this, but I am almost more than sure there's like bigger impeller, bigger cover, stuff like that. Or sometimes you can port the cover a little bit with a porting tool, get a little bit more flow out of it with that. I do that on a couple different models. But anyways, not for this video, guys. That's for a different video. All right, guys, so that pretty much sums up all of the performance upgrades that I would do front to back on a Honda TRX450R. Just engine performance upgrades, essentially, getting the air and fuel as much as you can in and out of the engine, which will give you the most horsepower. Obviously, I didn't talk about and many of the other things that you can do on these: suspension upgrades, A-arms, axles, wheels, steering stabilizers, gusseting frames, and all kinds of other cool little things that you can do to these to make them stable for many, many years. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like it, give me that like, share, subscribe. Get ready, because I've been talking to Vasily builds, and we're about to do some collaborations here in the near future, probably within the next month or two. And so I'm gonna be putting together a really cool YFZ, not stock, not even close, not even a YFZ motor is going in this thing. It's going to be something really sick. So you guys are gonna have to wait for the video to come out to be able to see what I'm working on. But as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Peace out.